Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at Talking Heads. Sunday road closures, offshore wind turbines in Manx waters, and the effects of the recent flooding were all popular topics for discussion this week. So was the reduction in grant given to the Sayle Gallery. Here's Stu Peters with more.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Is public funding for the Sayle Art Gallery important? The future of the operation could be in doubt after it received notification that funding is to be substantially cut. The Arts Council is withdrawing almost 70% of its backing from next April. The gallery, which is now based in Douglas, was previously located in St John's. Chairman of the Arts Council, Jeff Corkish MLC, says while unfortunate, the gallery's plight is not an isolated one. Is public funding for the gallery essential, do you think? Should it be transformed into a purely commercial operation, or would that be implausible? How important are the arts in times of austerity? The decision to pull funding for the Sayle Gallery is long overdue, says Margaret. Whenever I go past, there's hardly anybody in there, and it's absolutely incredible when the public's having to face so many extra charges thrust upon them due to times of austerity that support like this still has been in place. It seems total overkill, the number of shop units that the Sayle Gallery has. OK, yeah, I've not got an extra grind on this one. I'm not an arty sort of a person, so it's not the sort of facility that I would use. Another comment, we do tend to personalise things, don't we? Jeff Corkish, one of the biggest wastes of money to the taxpayer, says somebody. I don't know that that's fair. Hang on, is Corkish saying he's cutting their lottery funding? So will the money go to his favourite charities then? Asks Dave. That's also a little bit near the knuckle, Dave. You can't justify subsidising a facility which benefits a minority. If you can't survive without subsidy, you're not viable. You've been well looked after. It's now time to stand alone. That's from AJ and Laxey. I disagree. I see what you're saying. I understand your basic point, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of things that the Isle of Man government supports one way or another that are there for the benefits of minorities, and long may that continue. So, yeah, I mean, that's quite often why these things do need public funding. Could someone ask MLC Corkish what, apart from government and Legco, he actually feels is worthy of investment, says Simon. Another example of government manipulation is the grant is mostly being used to pay government a rent on the premises, says somebody else. The arts are for everyone, not just the minority, says Marty. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I just think it's probably the minority that use the arts or that enjoy the arts as such. Remember, Marty, you're talking to somebody now completely without any culture at all. So, good afternoon, Stu. I find it completely ironic that Mr. Corkish, a member of Legco, spouting that we can't afford the money that goes to the Arts Council. Well, no, the Arts Council gets their money. I think that's probably been reduced as well, the amount of money that they get from government or from the lottery fund. But, yeah, it's the money that the Arts Council is spending on the Sayle Gallery. It's being reduced, as I understand it. I have no real views either way on the Arts Council money, but maybe it's Legco that should be done away with to save Manx taxpayers a small fortune each year. That's from our friend the Manxman. All the time, Jeff Corkish has been in the legislature. This is the single most common sense decision he's made. It makes absolute sense to cut the funding. We've done to him without having the courage to do it. What? Why give £27,000 to an art gallery, especially when there are so many other cuts and charges being brought in? Let the Arts Council spend the money elsewhere. The Sayle Gallery should be run commercially or not at all. OK, I'm not sure that that's the idea of a gallery, because it just becomes a picture shop then, doesn't it, if it's going to be run completely commercially. And I expect that there are all sorts of things that you wouldn't be able to put on if it was just purely run on a commercial basis. You probably end up selling lots of pictures of girl tennis players with no knickers on, which is fine, but, you know, it's probably not the purpose. Maybe the government should cut its charity funding for the old and defunct MHK's home of rest called the MLC's Chamber, says Dave. Well, inevitable, but yes, OK, fine, thank you. I've had it explained to me. I understand what that last text says now. It makes absolute sense to cut the funding. Well done to him for having the courage to do it. That was the comment that I didn't quite understand earlier on. Good, let's go to the lines. We've got Sylvia on. Hello, Sylvia. Are you a doyenne of the arts?
Yes, I used to belong to the Manx Art Society.
All right.
I've always felt it was in the wrong place, and as it's so costly, and we have the Villa Marina underutilised, I would have thought it would cost nothing to find somewhere in the Villa Marina for it to be there. The footfall in the winter is pathetic, I would have thought.
Well, yeah, thinking about it, you could probably use the sort of the ticket hall atrium, the entrance hall there at the Villa Marina, couldn't you?
Yes, you there's also, when the Manx Art Society have their exhibitions, they have 2 a year, and they have a room downstairs. And I don't know what they use that room for other than that, because I don't often go to the Villa Marina.
Oh, the Promenade Suite. I've played there with the band. They have the beer festival in there. They have all sorts of things downstairs.
They do in the summer, but I mean, I'm talking about if you're going to have a business of any sort or promote anything, you've got to have a footfall.
Yes, yeah.
And there's nowhere to park there. It's the worst place in the world to go for a walk in the winter.
You can see why they would do it, though, because you've got the Gaiety Theatre on one side, you've got the Villa Marina on the other side, you've got an ice cream parlour next door.
Yes, I can appreciate that. They weren't there at first, but I do appreciate that, but I still think it's in the wrong place. And
where would you put it, Sylvia?
In the Villa Marina somewhere.
In the Villa, right.
And somebody should take a records of the footfall, other than during the summer. All
right, Sylvia, thank you very much for your call. We've got Simon on, who I think is pro the Sayle Gallery.
The location of the Sayle Gallery, it's the best location it's ever been in.
Oh, is it?
The most prestigious. Well, yeah, tucked away out in Peel or St John's or other places. Probably even less people get to visit it.
Sylvia was suggesting that it's not the best location, that, it'd perhaps do better if it was...
I don't understand that. They probably don't realise how difficult it is to create a contemporary gallery on the Isle of Man anyway, and just to sort of marginalise it because of parking. I mean, this is just car driving issues. It's nothing to do with the arts on the Isle of Man. But anyway, the point being that, it's time, I think, now for the Sayle Gallery to move into the realms of, a national contemporary gallery for the island, and to start bringing in shows from around the UK and possibly internationally.
Is it not something that relocating to the museum, for example, or the House of Manana?
That did come up, but suddenly, this is great news if that did happen. If the Isle of Man government and the museum took enough of an interest to sort of get on board with the British Arts Council touring exhibitions. People on the Isle of Man seem to sadly lack, in many ways, the beauty and joys of visual arts, painting, sculptures and so on, performance art, graffiti art, all these things which are really very vibrant in the British art scene. And, going back to the group of artists who try to create a Manx art scene here that obviously some people aren't interested, but, expecting it to now be reduced back to sort of pop-up galleries and cafes and so on.
All right, Simon, some good points there. Thank you very much for your call. And as ever, it's nice to talk to somebody who's actually involved in the arts in the island, somebody who's on the inside of that story, if you will. Stu, I concur with these esteemed gentlemen below. This is from Pauline. The innovative cities of the coming age will develop a creative union of technology, arts and civics. That was Sir Peter Hall. Art is a nation's most precious heritage, for it is in our works of art that we reveal to ourselves and to others the inner vision which guides us as a nation. And where there is no vision, the people perish. That was President Lyndon B. Johnson. Not the first person I'd think of as somebody who would support the arts. And politicians don't bring people together, artists do. That was Richard Daley, the former mayor of Chicago. Arts are essential to a healthy community, environment and economy, says Pauline. OK, thanks. Maybe they should commission consultants to look into the funding. I'm sure a couple of 100,000 should cover it. That's from Tom. Get your tongue out of your cheek. Art is an essential part of cultural education. Some types of art can reflect events that are happening in the present and so will become a historical record in the future. That from Dave in Ramsey. Ian called, as a buyer of art, I bought around half a dozen pieces on the island, but never any from the Sayle Gallery. We have independent art shops and galleries who used to have local artists in, sometimes doing things. They all went away from the private shops when the Sayle Gallery opened. It's the private businesses that the artists should be dealing with, not one which is government funded. It's a waste of money. OK. Rob says this is very short-sighted decided to take the money away, surely they could cut down on some of the money spent on the Tynwald Day celebrations like the band, the fly past and the Guard of Honour to save money. Young people need a place to show their wares. They're extremely talented. This is short-sighted. I don't think it's young people that necessarily display that. I think a lot of older people do as well. I think we won't have an island of culture in future if they take this sort of funding away from the visual arts. I'd like to know how much the Arts Council spends and how the money's distributed. They're going to start cutting funding libraries if they're going to cut what is a public gallery. Okay, and Simon says, what are the stated aims of Art Council funding? Bit of a kick in the pants, this, for the Douglas Art and Culture Quarter. Stu, we can't afford police on the streets. There's no way that we can have a publicly funded art gallery. That from Claire.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Would you support the building of a wind farm in Manx waters? We heard the news yesterday that Dong Wind Energy has signed a lease agreement with the Manx government to assess the area of seabed. It's been said that the deal could be worth £5 million a year to the Isle of Man. Would you welcome wind turbines in Manx waters, or are they something that you'd actively object to? I smell 50 million already reducing, says Steve. Oh, this is the government's £50 million scheme over 5 years to stimulate the economy, bring people over and bring jobs over and businesses. I think I've got the answer to that. And will Dong Energy be getting any grant from the government is another text. Well, I've got one of those FAQ sheets, frequently asked questions sheets, from Dong. One of the questions is, how much will government pay for the wind farms? Answer. The Isle of Man government will only be the landlord and collect rental for leasing the seabed. All the infrastructure costs involved in building and installing the wind farm will be borne by Dong Energy, not the Isle of Man government. The energy produced from offshore wind farm will be exported to the UK and have no financial or technical impact on Manx utilities. Now we know. Frank, naturally, has got a thought on this one. Hey boy, what an apt name for those in government supporting this harebrained scheme. Dongs, not facts, says Frank. A harebrained scheme? Well, I mean, if you on the face of it, Frank, and you might know more about this than I do, I wouldn't be at all surprised, but on the basis that it brings in £5 million a year to our treasury and it costs us nothing to do, I wouldn't suggest it's a harebrained scheme. I would have thought it was a great idea. If that's all true. I mean, if you think it's not, maybe. Do we get any power out of it? Basically, do we Manx people benefit from this? Oh, back to me FAQ. I don't think we do. Just looking at this. Question, why are we not intending to use this renewable energy to help support Isle of Man energy users? And the answer, the scale of electricity generation by commercial offshore wind farm development is too great for use in the Isle of Man, where we already have a stable and reliable supply of electricity. However, there is an option in later years for the Isle of Man to import for our own use a percentage of the generated renewable energy from an offshore wind farm. So there you go. I mean, if you think about it, I don't suppose the government really wants to be buying electricity from Dong, even if it is generated in our own waters, because that would reduce the reliance on our own power station that cost a third of £1 billion to build and is going to take 1,000 years to repay. So they want to be getting the use out of that, really. Why don't we fix a generator to the Laxey wheel, says Davy? Well, yes, I expect it might sort of generate enough electric to keep the fairy lights going in Laxey, maybe. Does the wheel turn year round, or is it just a seasonal thing? I don't know. Stu, suggestion to those who consider wind turbines an eyesore, don't look at them, says David H. Well, yeah, I mean, they wouldn't bother me, David H. But I mean, if these things were huge and they were sitting on the horizon, not that far out to sea, then I could understand that it might spoil the view for some people. But yes, you can always look the other way, I suppose. I think it's a shame that the island put so much investment into a natural gas scheme as a means of generating electricity, when we could have led the way with renewable energy. This island has massive amounts of wind and tidal energy. I would have preferred to see this utilised for our own energy needs rather than selling it off to a UK company. I think offshore wind turbines are a great idea, making money for the government and doing our bit for the environment. I think they add to the skyline rather than just a boring sea, says Matty. Well, one man's boring is another man's beautiful. The reason the power produced won't come ashore here is because the Manx government won't pay the monstrous subsidies that the British government does. I think there's an amount of truth in that. These operators cannot make money out of these inefficient monstrosities otherwise. It's a greeny con, says Neil. Well, Neil, let me refer you to the official words from the Dong document. And one of the questions on their Q&A, are wind farms inefficient? Now, this is something that we hear an awful lot in this programme when we talk about alternative energy, that wind farms are horribly inefficient? Answer. Offshore wind farms in the Irish Sea generate electricity approximately 80 to 85% of the time and have a capacity factor of greater than 43%, which is comparable to conventional power stations. Neighbouring jurisdictions such as Scotland and Ireland on windy days currently generate 50% of their electricity from wind power. On the 19th of October last year, the UK generated 24% of its electricity from wind power. So it obviously works. I mean, it's one of those things that the formula might make sense to an accountant, but it would look a bit daft to the rest of us. It might well be that these things work for 5 years before they need to be replaced, and they take 4 years to pay for the installation costs. But on the basis that in the 5th year it's effectively free money, then as long as it makes enough free money to replace it and to pay for the one that's been and all the rest of it, then it would work. But, if you want to look at it another way, then it's like, it's running at a loss for 4 years. Stu, great idea if this generates $5 million a year. However, will this benefit us, the general public, or is this just more money to pay top civil servants, police and fire service extortionate pensions? Sorry to sound negative. Oh, I wasn't thinking that at all, Jenny. But it appears that pensions are the problem we have for the next 25 years or so. Yes, I agree. If conditions are now only just changing, this is a serious worry, and their terms and conditions need changing like they did with bus drivers. Our generation are working to feather the nest of public sector servants. I think an awful lot of people would agree with you, Jenny. So, yes. Robin Peelsby and I said, I'd rather they get money from renewable than online gambling. It'd be something that does good in the long run rather than these get-rich-quick schemes. Well, yes, but another more pragmatic way to look at that, Rob, is that, an ordinary working man could become a millionaire if he puts a bet in the right order. Whereas out of renewables, it's only the usual suspects, I suppose, that'll make a lot of money out of this. And it's not the working man on the street. Get it built, it's a non-brainer. Green energy, money in and jobs. You'd have to be an idiot to oppose it. Probably 24 votes against that. That's poor. Jock called. I was amazed when I stayed at my sister's on Ransell Hill in Laxey that you can see the ones out there already. They're all right. I thought that there'd be a blot on the landscape, but they're not. They're a good way across, though, aren't they? Aren't those the ones at Barrow? If the Isle of Man is going to make $5 million from this, then that's a nice return. They keep kicking money out. It'd be nice to get something in, but you don't get something for nothing, so there must be fine print to this. You've fallen foul of contract law in the past then, Jock. But the future has got to be wind farms and solar panels. And, I think that the more exciting one is tidal power, isn't it? The Laxey Corn Mill and Salmon Lake Centre already use turbine renewable energy taken from the Laxey River. They won the recent Government Energy Award. Good. The rent for the seabed is only guaranteed while the UK subsidise green energy. Once they pull the plug, they're left with a problem. Well, I don't suppose that'll matter to us. We might end up owning a wind farm then if somebody like Dong decide to pull out of the job because they're not getting the subsidies from the UK government anymore. But, there'll be a contract, it'll be a lease, and they'll have to pay it whether they're getting subsidies or not, I suppose. The wind farms in the Irish Sea are hardly working most of the time. They're not spinning, and there's loads of wind. Is there any jobs for us Manx? Yes, I think there are. I guess that there will be jobs, won't there? Whether there are many Manx jobs or not, I don't know. Stu, one area where the work of the steam packet to protect the island's interests is to be applauded is in relation to protecting our ferry routes from the idiots with money-grubbing plans to block the routes with wind farms, increasing journey times, putting up fuel consumption and increasing the chance of cancellation in weather because alternative routes are not available. The Isle of Man is now surely under a moral obligation to the other ferry operators in the Irish Sea not to support wind farm proposals in our territorial waters, which will have the same disruptive consequence for their routes as this idea will have for routes between England and Northern Ireland. That from John W. Windmills being built on one of the island's best scallop grounds of Ramsey Laxey. What do the island's fishermen think about this? This has all got to be approved. It's plans at the moment. It's a sort of a look-see exercise at the moment. There'll be all sorts of consultations where people like the fishermen, I'm sure, can have their say. Now, this one from Mark. Wind power does not provide a reliable source of energy. It costs more than coal and oil in the long term. The Conservation Lobby want to see wind power through rose-coloured spectacles. Wind power could not provide sufficient energy as there's nowhere in the entire world that's windy long enough to support it at the level that it'd make money as opposed to costing more than it generates currently. They don't operate when it's not windy enough and are turned off when it's too windy. This leaves a narrow window of operations. The subsidies are the only thing that make it viable. If wind power was the answer to our energy problems, then I, for one, would be quick to write positively about them. It's known throughout the world that wind power doesn't work. The Isle of Man should not chase after the wind industry, as it is fundamentally flawed technology, at best only capable of 15% efficiency with respect to the energy put in. The subsidies are, of course, passed on to the users of the wind-generated electricity. So, for the Isle of Man to go wind-powered would guarantee very high bills and having to adjust to using electricity when it's only a bit windy, certainly not at times when it's very windy and coldest, the very time when you need energy to keep warm. Nuclear power is the only long-term answer to world energy problems. I can hear the knee-jerking, uninformed nuclear alarmists as I write. The next best hope is nuclear fission, i.e. creating mini-suns here on Earth. Scientists are not far off achieving this. That from Mark. Okay. Well, I did read the thing about the efficiency of these things, but I did notice as I was reading it that they were saying that on the 19th of October 2014, the UK generated 24% of its electricity from wind power. Whether or not that figure was the same on the 18th and the 20th of October 2014, I don't know, so maybe that was just a particularly good day. Britain has enough coal to last 1,000 years. Increased research into carbon capture would make more sense than the technology exported worldwide, says Tom. 1,000 years? Are you sure, Tom?
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Would you welcome more road closures for racing events on Sundays? There's been a call for a rethink over a possible relaxation of the restrictions on road closures on Sundays as part of new legislation making its way through the branches of Tynwald. There are concerns over the impact racing on Sundays could have on people's ability to attend church services. Would you welcome the rules governing Sunday racing being relaxed, or would you prefer to see the day of rest being left as just that? Is Sunday racing acceptable, or are there already too many road closures for racing? Could the addition of a provision for racing on Sundays help to ease some of the issues caused by inclement weather during some events? Would routine closures on Sunday be too disruptive? Sunday racing, I'm ambivalent about this. However, Peter Murcott expects there'll be a debate when the latest road racing bill goes through its clauses stage in the House of Keys. I've sat in the public gallery in the House of Keys when bills have gone through this stage of the legislative process. I believe the clauses needed serious debate, but apart from maybe 2 or 3 members, the rest just nodded each clause through. I seriously doubt they even knew what they were voting for, but prefer to keep their mouths shut and at the same time please the Council of Ministers by just voting aye. Anyway, good luck, Peter, says Albert. Thank you. After a Saturday night of drunkenness and debauchery, the last thing on my mind would be how I'm getting to church anyway, still trying to find the car, says a different Albert altogether. Yes, I suppose. Doesn't Mr. Murcott know by now there's only one God worshipped over here? That's the motorbike. Thousands of followers attend twice yearly mass, while the rest of us non-believers have to put up or shut up. That's from Postman Pete. Hardly anybody goes to church these days. Just another example of a minority of God lovers telling the majority what to do, says Steve. Make better use of the time they have. All we seem to have are endless corporate and parade laps these days. Interesting thought, yeah. Stu, if the problem is that the fundamental constitution of the Isle of Man is Christian, perhaps that should be changed instead, says David H. Stu, Peter Murcott complains that this will disrupt the members of his social club called the Church, but consistently tries to disrupt the lives of people who have no interest in his fantasies. He reminds me of the people who go to Star Trek conventions and speak Klingon. At least they don't try to impose their hobby on others. I wouldn't be too sure about that, Brian. It'll only be 2 or 3 Sundays. I thought God was all around us, so they can pray from home those days. That's from Dog. A lot of churches make a lot of money out of the TT and Grand Prix, selling food and charging entrance fees to watch on their land. They should be careful they don't bite the hand that feeds it. How many people watch the bikes compared to the sizes of the congregations of the churches on the course? Asks Alan. In this modern world, Sunday is just another day. If we don't have racing on a Sunday because it'll inconvenience a handful of imaginary friend worshippers, then you can't have racing any day, as there'll be many more people inconvenienced on the other 6 days. You can't have a ridiculously small percentage of disillusioned people dictating to the rest of us. Sorry, but I despise religion and all it stands for. And that from the Manxman. I've got a thing about religion. I'm not religious in any way, shape or form, but I do respect those of my friends, and I've got a lot of friends, most of them much cleverer than me, intellectually a lot more clever than me, and they believe in a God. And I've kind of decided, I've concluded over the years that religion's one of those things that, as the Americans say, you either got it or you don't got it. And I've never got it. I've never understood it. It seems completely alien to me as a concept, but I know an awful lot of people who I respect and admire, and they get it. So, I think it's a bit lazy to accuse people who are religious of being sort of, imaginary friend worshippers. They get something that I don't, a bit like modern art or jazz. I don't get either of those things either, but I know that it brings a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. So, live and let live, folks. Stu, if Sunday racing is going to cause a lot of trouble to churchgoers, what about the poor people who live on the course or adjacent there too? These people have to make sacrifices with their domestic arrangements, so I'm wondering why can't the church? Moreover, with the potential dates being known of race meetings, the situation of church buildings, cannot services be correlated to avoid the conflicting Sundays, says Chris. You'd have thought so, wouldn't you, Chris? Certainly. The DOI takes the view that the proposed legislation will make racing on a Sunday possible. It does not make it a right or a foregone decision. Whilst the DOI understands and appreciates the concerns in respect of major events such as the TT, some small events may be welcomed by the community on a Sunday. Ultimately, the Minister for the Department of Infrastructure will be able to stop any event taking place on a Sunday if he or she does not think it appropriate. Roads closing 1 p.m. till 9 p.m. means that roads can't be closed before those times. That from our friend Phil Edge, who knows all about road racing. That's from the consultation document, I believe. Let's go to the lines and take our final caller on this, and this is David. Hello, David.
I'm a Methodist minister, so I've heard what Peter said, but and this could potentially be a real pain for us, but I think you're missing a trick by focusing on the church issue in this debate. Okay. So I think the real issue for most people on the island, because let's face it, most people don't do church, but the real issue is quality of life and being able to travel around on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, if you live out in Kirkmichael, would you welcome the road being closed more often during the year? If you need to get to visit people in the hospital or the hospice, are you happy to be trolling up the access road and all that involves? So I think it's a bigger debate. And as I say, by focusing just on the church bit, you're in danger of people switching off from the issue.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, not everybody is a big fan of road racing, so I expect if you do live somewhere like Kirkmichael, somewhere on the course, then it's a broader issue than just the church, isn't it? You make a good point,
right,
David. Good, thank you for calling today. Stu, I have no problem with anybody doing anything that brings them pleasure or comfort, talking about religion now, as long as they keep their ideas and thoughts to themselves, don't try to impeach their beliefs to others. But they don't. Even on your deathbed, they try to get you into their flock. I despise any organisation that tries to dictate their harebrained ideas to the masses, probably why I despise government so much. Have a good afternoon, says the Manxman. Thank you.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Do you support British action against Islamic State targets in Syria? 4 RAF Tornado jets, which carry a range of munitions, including paveway-guided bombs, took off from their base in Cyprus within hours of last night's vote in favour of action in the House of Commons. Are airstrikes the right move, do you think? Does Britain have an obligation to join allies to take part in the action against IS targets in Syria? Or are the arguments against taking action more compelling than those put forward against, as far as you're concerned, put forward for? It seems that Britain has effectively declared war now on Islamic State terrorism in Syria. What do we think about that? Airstrikes started within minutes almost of the vote being taken in the House of Commons last night. What do we think about it? Let's go to the lines and see what Alan makes of this.
Unfortunately, the Prime Minister used this phrase that those people who did not support him were terrorist sympathizers. Now, I think this word or this phrase, if you don't support him, you support terrorist sympathizers. That's what you are. I think this is totally unacceptable in a democracy. Democracy is about various views on any issue. Now, what he's saying, it's almost Stalinist. If you go back to communist Russia after 1945, this is the sort of thing that was trotted out by Stalin. If you don't agree with me, you go to the Gulag. Now, obviously, the Prime Minister is not sort of saying you go to the Gulag, but he is attaching this very negative phrase to people.
Well, it's funny because I've I've got a text from one of our regular contributors, David H., who says, to say that terrorist sympathisers are against airstrikes is not the same as saying that if you're against airstrikes, you're a terrorist sympathiser, as our interviewer misquoted David Cameron, apparently. I don't know, but I don't know if that...
He had... The question was raised many times in the House of Commons yesterday by a variety of people. Alex Salmond raised the matter and asked the Prime Minister to apologise, and he refused to do so. And then there were a number of other people who raised the same question, including the leader of the Labour Party, would you, in fact, withdraw that statement? Would you apologise? And he refuses to do so. So he continues with this matter of this label which he's attaching to people of terrorist sympathisers. Sure. So I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it helps our democracy by stigmatising people who disagree with the government.
Sure, yeah.
I think in a free democracy, the people are allowed to express their views on any issue.
Of course.
The issue that we're talking about this morning is, are airstrikes a good idea? Well, you posed that question. The jury, obviously, is still out because the first attacks by the RAF have only just taken place. Now, as I said the other day, the way we talk in this country about our Air Force and our airstrikes, you would think we're going back to the Second World War of 1,000 bombers attacking Berlin.
And it's just 8 aeroplanes, isn't it? Yeah.
A complete and utter nonsense. I mean, this is a fantasy world that we have an important Air Force that are going to knock these terrorists out of the area which they control at the moment.
Well, in fairness, and I take your point, but in fairness, I think that, 8 Tornadoes probably does have the striking power of 100 Lancasters. So, it's not an insignificant effort, is it?
Well, I mean, the question also is what is going to be the outcome of this? Now, the thing that I would say of joining this coalition is that there may well be a diplomatic dividend. That is to say, we have joined the Americans and the French and a few others, but not that many others, in this matter of bombing the ISIS people in Syria. So we may well reap some sort of diplomatic dividend. We are going along with our NATO allies in terms of the French and the Americans. But then there's the question of the Russians. I mean, the Russians have a completely different agenda.
All right, we need to leave it there, but some very good points there, Alan. Thank you again for your call. And let's see what Pat makes of this. Hello, Pat.
I'm a terrorist sympathiser, obviously, because I'm against the bombing.
Okay.
But what I see it as, these people, the people over in Syria, the terrorists, are getting their arms, are getting their cash from somewhere.
Sure.
They're selling oil, they're selling drugs. Now, why can't we in the 21st century attack that?
Yeah.
Find where this money's coming from, close those accounts down, stop people selling them arms somehow. If we cut them off at source, if we stop feeding them with money, they won't be able to buy anything.
Yeah, but we know that the military-industrial complex is much more powerful than all the governments in the world anyway, isn't it? So, that's not going to happen.
Isn't it time the governments in the world got together and stopped doing that?
Well, yeah.
Stop doing that, indeed. I mean,
wouldn't that be lovely?
Wouldn't it be lovely? It's quite possible. Let's face it, you've got the UN.
I saw an interesting thing in one of the newspapers today that showed that the Russians had actually got photographic proof that Turkey was buying oil, I think, from Islamic State. So, more of that kind of thing would be helpful, wouldn't it?
It's easy enough. I mean, the oil doesn't come across in little barrels. It comes across in pipelines.
Yeah.
Get rid of the pipelines. Come on, they're not carrying it across in trucks. But, I mean, when there's bombing now, they're saying, right, the British are going to bomb. It'll be ineffective. But what really annoys me is they're quite willing to accept there will be collateral damage.
Yeah.
And what that means is innocent people will die.
Sure.
These people haven't got a choice of being amongst the terrorists. Somebody walks into your kitchen with an AK-47. You don't just shoot them out with the cat and shut the door behind them. They haven't got a choice. These people are there. They've got no choice. But it seems that the British government accept that they are going to die. Women, children, old men, whoever, people that aren't even involved are going to die.
But isn't there always collateral damage? Isn't there always collateral damage when you've got any sort of a war like this? And isn't it inevitable?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. If you start bombing them, but don't bomb them. Well, don't help the Americans and the Russians and whoever else is dropping bombs all over the place.
So just embargo the supply of weapons and money.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Pat. Again, some good thoughts. Thank you very much indeed. Stu, I watched last night's House of Commons gathering of clowns, politicians, and what a prehistoric gathering of toffee-nosed, out of touch with the real world snobs they are. Oh, come on, Ian, get it off your chest. Do all our prime ministers have to go to war to make a name for themselves? I think they do, actually. I think it's part of the contract. I understand after Paris a few weeks ago that things need to be done to fight ISIS, but I think that this is a knee-jerk reaction. The UK will be a priority for ISIS to attack us sooner rather than later. I, for one, hope that those who voted to bomb Syria are targeted and not the innocent British public, says Ian. Bombing Iraq back to the Stone Age achieved nothing but more conflict. Are we going to bomb Assad if IS is defeated, says Tom. Well, I would imagine that that's the Allies' end game, but it's not the Russians' end game, and that's the worry. At the moment, it seems that we're rubbing along fairly well with the Russians, but, if this ever gets to any sort of a conclusion, is that the point that people are going to start falling out? And that is a bigger worry to me, the West and the Russians falling out, than what happens in Syria, to be honest. The only obligation the UK has to be the USA's lapdog. They lie over and wait for their belly rubbed all the time. Cameron should wear a rah-rah skirt and pom-poms as the president's chief cheerleader. Let's hope we don't reap what we sow, says Alan. Stu, I believe that one of the main issues in this situation is the selling and consequent trafficking of arms into the Middle East and the trafficking of oil, heroin and cannabis out of the region. Without dealing with these root cause issues, I fail to see a positive outcome of this sad situation. From Neil. Thanks, Neil. Dogs of war have already been unleashed when the scrum from hell crawled out of the sewers and started attacking us and our way of life. Damned if we do, damned if we don't, says Dave. Stu, we haven't gone to war. We were already at war. People are now up in arms against the action in Syria, yet last month said nothing against the RAF missions into Iraq. All we're doing is following the movement of ISIS. Bombing alone, alas, will not work. Those supplying and funding ISIS need to be outed too, says Brian. Stu, I find the whole thing terrifying. Yeah, me too. Whatever your opinion of Mr. Corbyn, you have to admire his principles. Yes, I do, actually. I do. I think he'd be an awful Prime Minister, but I do admire his principles and the fact that he's quite happy to stand by them. Also, what is the long-term plan in bombing? Is bombing just a short-term knee-jerk strategy? Most of the murderers in the French atrocity were European. Again, you're right on that, I think. There are radical people in the UK, and do we run the risk of alienating people who have moderate views? And the Prime Minister should apologise for calling anti-bombing people as terrorist sympathisers. How dare he? His whole issue is just a question of conscience, says Jan. This war sickens me. I just wish that there was peace on earth. It's all about greed at the end of the day. That's anonymous. I don't know quite why. Well, it's about greed and it's all about religion, isn't it? I'm an atheist, but I do wish that God would come back and just descend to a mountain somewhere and issue a new commandment. Be nice. Treat people as you would like to be treated yourself. That's all you need. You don't need anything else about, looking at your neighbour's wife or whatever. Just be nice, everybody.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Were you caught up in yesterday's weather chaos? Torrential rain led to long delays as motorists battled their way home through extraordinary amounts of water engulfing many roads. Some drivers were even forced to give up and abandon their vehicles. Some of the most dramatic scenes were in Laxey, where a bus ended up in the river after a bridge collapsed. Were you caught up in the chaos yesterday? What were the conditions like for you? Tell us about your experiences. Question, is there a weight limit on Laxey Bridge? Well, not anymore, there isn't. And I presume that if there was a weight limit there, then it was sufficient to allow a fully loaded double-decker to go over it. Hey boy, maybe this will be a wake-up call to the DOI, empty the gullies, etc., sort the infrastructure, etc., clean out all the grids, etc. It's not rocket science, says G. OK, let's go to the lines. We've got Neil on in Castletown. Hello, Neil.
It was a very rough day yesterday, but one thing I've noticed, particularly when you cycle around as much as I do, the roads don't seem to drain anymore. They seem to be constructing roads without a camber.
I agree.
even in moderately medium rain conditions, the road surface is covered with water.
I agree, absolutely. I noticed that a few weeks ago. On my drive, after I finished the programme, I drive down to Athol Street, and all the way down Head Road is a river whenever it rains, and I'm not talking about just, especially heavy rain like we had yesterday. There's water running right across the road, and there are grids, but, there's very little camber. Now, I expect that the DOI people would say, well, that's because most roads on the island were originally cart tracks that were just tarmacked over, so they weren't constructed properly. But, if we've got drains, they don't seem to be doing the job.
Well, I've cycled up this main road from Castletown through Santon for, 20-odd years, and we never, ever used to have the amount of surface water which sits on it now.
Yeah.
The main problem is the construction of the roads.
Well, I was having a look down Athol Street yesterday, and I didn't realise, it's one of those things that you don't realise until something goes wrong, but, there don't seem to be that many grids there, and they resurfaced it a year or so ago. So we've got a lovely road surface now, and it does have a camber on it, in fairness, but the grids, and there aren't many of them, seem to be in the wrong positions. So, for example, the water will come down the street and it'll go across the junctions rather than being sort of diverted away into the drains.
Exactly, and very often you find that the level of the catch pit is actually above the level of the road, so the road can't even get into the catch pit.
Or the same level. There doesn't seem to be any depression as such to collect it. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we've got some real problems with drainage on the island, to be honest.
And particularly in a free draining alluvial soil like it is around here, around King William's and Brookfield, etc. Yeah. The rain runs away in the gardens fine. It is just lying on the surface of the roads, which is entirely down to bad drainage, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, I walked up to the car yesterday, and is it St George's Street, around the side there, the last on the right as you're going down Athol Street, and it was a river coming down the path as well. So you'd got a river coming down the road, and you'd got a river coming down the path. Well, that's crazy, So obviously the paths are flat, and they're not designed to drain either.
I know. My family are farmed, and everything is designed so that water will run into a low depression and into storm drains and effectively across field drains and down into the rivers, etc.
Yeah.
But for some reason, our civil engineers don't seem to be able to get the levelling right.
No, I agree with everything that you've said there, Neil.
Okay.
Thanks very much for your call. Covering big areas of green fields with concrete and disturbing natural drainage and connecting new estates to old Victorian system doesn't help, says somebody else. Hey boy, that was an awful flood yesterday in Parliament Square. I got stuck in it and couldn't believe the amount of half-heads driving flat out on the phones through it. Well done to the DOI and commissioners' workers who mucked in. That's from Frank. Well, there's the Christmas spirit right there. That's the first time that Frank's ever sent anything positive about anything, I'm convinced. Thank you, Frank. Good, I like it. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of the drains and gullies were just overwhelmed with the sheer amount of water, says Dave. What else? Hi, I know the emergency services are busy and stretched at this time, but why can't DOI leave the mountain road closed and clear up the debris on other routes, i.e. the coast road? That's from Andy K. Thank you, Andy. OK, the government spent millions doing the drainage on Peel Road. Now, it was bad weather, but the flooding outside the fire station's ridiculous, possibly preventing a very important emergency service from helping people in a situation like this. What a disgrace. Sack 'em all. Yeah, well, if every time anything went wrong on the Isle of Man, we sacked all the people that might even be vaguely responsible for it, there'd be everybody on the dole and nobody working at all. First of all, thank you to all the people who are helping, but is it just me, or is a lot of the flooding appear to be worse, where major roadworks have gone on over the last months? Peel Road, Bowring Road, Foxdale, Laxey, etc. Even the mountain road, where drainage soak away was filled with concrete and diverted to grids. We can't predict the weather, but one thing we can say is that the Isle of Man has weather, and I agree, we've been worried about blocked grids since road cleaning maintenance was passed to the local authority this year. We used to have road sweeping every week in autumn. Now we have it at once after pointing this out. Now we've had it once after pointing it out. Everybody keep safe this afternoon and over the weekend, says Jan. Thank you, Jan. Douglas Ramsey Coast Road, dark, chocker with vehicles, running water and debris. Scary, really. Should have heeded police warning. I turned round at Liverpool Arms and went back to work, says GC. Somebody called and said, I left Port St Mary at 4:30 yesterday afternoon and got home to Onchan at 6 p.m. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the guys at the bottom of Richmond Hill and at Pulrose Power Station. They did a great job getting people home. although there was an idiot in a 4x4 that soaked my car. The police did a great job too, keeping on top of all that traffic. All the guys that were out in horrible conditions did an amazing job. But there is a question over whether the island's infrastructure can cope with it all. Didn't seem all that bad compared to what we've had in the past. Cue the eco-warriors as if this has not happened before. You only have to look at old photos of Laxey to see that this has happened before. Totally agree with G. No maintenance of gullies and ditches. That from Steve. Stu, I stopped to help somebody whose car broke down in the middle of a flood. Oh, good on you. Good Samaritan. I'd just hitched his car up to my truck and was wading through the water to get in my truck to pull him out when an idiot in a big van drove past at about 25 miles an hour and soaked everyone in the vicinity. Yeah, we seem to have had quite a few reports of people doing that. And, I mean, let's not judge all 4x4 drivers. I know that the Isle of Man 4x4 club will have been out in force trying to help people yesterday and doing good works, but there are some of these idiots with the Chelsea tractors who, because, you know, they can get through it all right, they just carry on at full speed regardless of everybody else. I feel some criticism of the DOI is a bit harsh. Yesterday's freakish weather was exactly that, freakish. Was it? I mean, I wasn't out in the worst of it, certainly. I mean, it was heavy rain, but I don't know if it was freakishly heavy. But like I say, I wasn't out in it, and I think that one of the contributing factors is the fact that it's been horribly wet for weeks now, hasn't it? So I suppose where it would normally be soaked up, it's just run off. A lot of the flooding on the roads happened because the floodwater level is simply higher than the roads. Peel Road, for instance, the river level was higher than the road level. No amount of drainage would help. There was nowhere for the water to drain to. Other roads similar. Admittedly, some roads are bad, though. That's from the Manxman. Yeah, and somebody said it was high tide as well, so I suppose that Peel Road that drains effectively into the sea, if the sea level's high, then it's not really got anywhere to go. It was high tide at the peak of the flood, might have had something to do with Peel Road and the Ramsey flood, says one of our contributors. I thank you.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks to everyone who took part in the programme this week. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion, you can call, text or email between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays, or you can share your thoughts anytime on the Facebook page, Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of manxradio.com, and the website's also where you'll find an update of what's being discussed each day. You can also keep up to date with that information by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. If there's anything you think we should be discussing on the programme, let us know by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.